So you were defined by the French as an American.
Yes.
And when you came back to the United States, did you then think, I am an American?
Yes, but there were a lot of people who didn't agree with that. And that, which it's an eye-opener to the depths of racial prejudice and discrimination, because it's a completely different thing.
What did that do for you when you came back?
Well, I was, just, when I first got back, I didn't join. I came back in June of '61, but it wasn't until 1962 that Tom Jacobson and I had been classmates at UWM, and we met in the student union. And we used to shoot pool and talk a lot. And at that same time, I met him because he was graduating from UW Law School. And he was coming back to Milwaukee. And in his stay in Madison in law school, he met Lloyd Barbie. So they had become a team. And so he started talking to me about civil rights. I said, well, that sounds like a winner to me. So we got involved, and he was a lawyer for the branch, and I was the director of the NAACP Youth Council. Mm-hmm. And at that time, the thing that got us going, you're kind of like waiting for something to happen. And I don't recall his name, but this young man, African-American student at UWM, applied for a busboy job at Mark's Big Boy on East North Avenue there, right at Farwell and Prospect on that corner. It's a different business now. But, and he said, well, I went there and they told me the job was filled. And 3 days later, I see the sign in the window again. And so I went back again and they told me it was filled. And with that, we said, okay, you go there and apply again. So he went and applied, and they told him the job was filled. And we had a white tester just waiting. So as soon as he reported to us that he was told the job was filled, we sent the white tester in. And they told him he could start in that afternoon. And that evening, we had a parade of marchers around the Mark's Big Boy picketing him. And much to our dismay, it really disgruntled a lot of the older NAACPers. And so we had a lot of internal hassles going on. They wanted to write letters and talk to people and file lawsuits and all of that stuff. And we said, no, the direct action will get it, And so we were right. Shortly after, we started a demonstration for about 3 days. And then the second day, we started a second demonstration down 5th in Wisconsin, right across from what then was the Schrader Hotel. And with that, we got a letter, I got a call from Steve Marcus, because I knew him from Madison. I met him and was very excited about meeting him because he was the president then of what the fraternity was, Pi Lam, the Jewish male fraternity. And he was instrumental in getting Charlie Thomas, who was an All-Big Ten All-American fullback for UW right after Allen Amici, into the fraternity and got him in. And it's an interesting story. I can follow on to that. Well, quickly the meeting got underway, and with hardly anything, he said, well, we'll fix that. And the young boy was hired by Mark's Big Boy, and we were happy about that. And subsequent to that, several years after that, I was on the board of the National Conference of Christians and Jews right here in Milwaukee. And we had the Humanitarian of the Year award. And there were 3 categories: Christian, Catholic, and Protestant. And so when we were looking for candidates, I said, well, I can think of a very outstanding one, Steve Marcus. And I nominated him and he got the award, And things went on, the community grew. But what that young man started was an introduction to the racial discrimination in employment in the entire city of Milwaukee, everywhere. We started to then look at the companies in this community, and you had no minorities in management any place. You could walk up and down Wisconsin Avenue and you wouldn't see a minority doing anything, or if you happen to see one, he or she would be sweeping. I mean, that's from Walgreens to Gimbel, Schuster's, Boston Store, the whole works. And so we said, and in industry, forget it, just nothing. And so we organized ourselves and so we started writing letters to the companies, to different companies. And we went from where we would write a letter, we'd never hear from them. But what they didn't understand is by the second letter, we were meeting and devising a strategy to bring about a protest demonstration. And so if they didn't answer the second letter, that's what they would be met with. We wouldn't call them, we wouldn't write them anymore. When they look up, pickets would be everywhere. And the beautiful thing about the community is once we demonstrated that we were about action, they would come out. We'd start a demonstration with the core of the people we had, and then the next day people would be coming from everywhere. So
was this through the auspices of the NAACP?
No, that's the other point. We had to leave the NAACP rather than just go through a whole lot of internal hocus pocus and have progress slowed. We started the Milwaukee chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, which was founded by the late James Farmer, who, as you might recall, was a part of the early sit-in demonstrations for the college kids in the Southeast, and Carolina and Virginia, I think, and some other states around it. And so we became the first core chapter in this region. And needless to say, we were a terribly militant group. And it was this group that were doing things. And two powerful stories in terms of industry was Allen Bradley. We wrote to them because they had none. And they were quick to defend the fact that they didn't have any because, but they didn't have any what they call, we don't have any entry-level jobs. Oh. And when you looked at it, it was a very clever strategy. They saved all their entry-level jobs for people who already worked there who would get hurt on the job and couldn't any longer work on the job that they were originally hired to do. So then we'd put them in those jobs, sweeping or whatever. So we said, well, that's impossible. So when we wrote them and finally got a meeting with them after the second letter, I remember from the meeting the well-dressed chap who was seated beside me, he said, well, we're not your typical business, and our clients, as you might know, are industrial-based. And they had the best these switching systems in the industry, turning on and off the machines and that kind of stuff. And in fact, if you go in factories today and you look at these big switch boxes, they'll have that A and B right there. So anyway, we said, oh, okay, but I said to the fellow, I said, well, coming in this plant, if you go out there right now and look at it, there are two sets of tracks that go into the plant, the main plant out there on Greenfield Avenue. I said, if we put enough humanity across those tracks, you won't be able to do any business. And what this shows is, I think, is that highly capable people with successful businesses, they are keenly aware of their environment, and they know where all the critical elements are. When we threatened to demonstrate them, as I described to you, they went right out and found Dave Ford, who now is a prominent member of our community, and I didn't know him, anything about him. I ended up being on the board of trustees of the Milwaukee Boys and Girls Club with him. But he was an engineer who graduated from the University of Illinois and was one of the first African Americans to work on the atomic bomb. Well, he was well known in the industry. Well, why don't you hire him? Well, they didn't. And what it showed was you have to put pressure, or we had to put pressure at that time, because they just wouldn't hire you.
Now, this was all before the open housing marches started.
Yeah, yes, it was.
What happened when that got going? Did you participate in those marches?
I didn't, but I was an ally of Father Gropius, and I liked and respected him. And I think it's important to qualify the difference in these marches. Our marches were tended to be social, yes, but they had an economic aspect to them. Because if you don't get a job, you know, you can talk all you want to talk. You're not into the economic side of the society, which is, you know, is terribly important in America. I took a political science course, and one of the paradigms that was often shown was that the democratic society in which we live is a triangle. And on the one side you have the social, the other side you have the political. But at the base of both of those is economic. And if that doesn't work, the two sides, forget it. And so we focused on the economic. And at first they told us, for example, in housing, if you went along Farwell and Prospect Avenue near the lake, forget it, there were no minorities living over there. And what they tell you, well, they can't afford to live here. You know. Well, after a couple of those big high-rises, we put the pickets in front of them. All of a sudden, some minorities had enough money to live there. You know, and so it was important, but it was fun. But we just, I mean, when you really think about that period, it was disappointing, and you know, being an American in a way is to say, define how little we were a part of this great society. And it took those demonstrations. And one of the things sometimes that bothers me deeply is that there were the people who joined us. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, they were just like myself. They were wonderful people, you know. And some of them was, you know, the Les Johnson, Arlene Johnson, of course, Lloyd Barbie, Tom Jacobson, Margaret Bedford, God rest her soul. And these were people who were arrested at the county courthouse and in the mayor's office at City Hall. And I mean, you could count on them. Ernest Green, my brothers and sisters. And I can just go on and name a lot of them. Some of them have passed, but Dave Novick, you might know that name. He both reported and was a photographer for the black newspapers.
Oh, yes, yes. As things evolved from the demonstrations that you were mounting against businesses and for the economic reasons, and then as things evolved into the open housing marches and the larger civil rights marches.
Okay, well, the open housing marches, the thing about those is that, and to give Father Guthrie credit, what those marches really did is they kept a focus, a high focus, because they brought a national spotlight on Milwaukee because of the reaction of the marchers as they went into the south side of Milwaukee. But that was not an economic march. It was clearly a social one. And it highlighted the prejudices in the city. Because as you know, those people, they were spit upon, rocks were thrown at them. But they held their own and were out there for 250 days, as I recall, something like that.
What were you thinking during this time? Were you watching them from the sidelines, or were you supportive in the background?
Well, what had happened was I had gone back to work all the time I was working at American Motors. And I ran for Local 75 for the bargaining committee, and I missed it by 19 votes. And right after that, the director of industrial relations asked me if I would consider working on his staff as a labor relations rep, you know, dealing with problems with the union for the company. And I did. I said, well, I need to do something. Somebody has to do this. And of course, that enabled me to get involved. I'm proud to say we were responsible for the first black skilled tradesman in tool and die. And they were doing a clever thing, and here you have the unions at work now. And one of the ways that they argued that you couldn't put minorities in here because the majority of the die makers only speak German. Okay. And so then they said, well, I said, well, that's not going to work. And so, but to start with, we'll meet you halfway. And I forget the brother's name, but he spoke a little German, enough to get into the training program. And we got him in, and he became a tradesman. And then that started to break that stuff down. I mean, come on, just get out of here with that. And we brought in millwrights, which is a huge segment in most companies, because you have to have these highly trained repairmen who can come in if a line breaks or something goes down, because it's so detrimental to production. And those guys, to watch them work at something, they can come in and fix something in a matter of minutes.
Did the larger marches that were going on while you were working, did they have any impact on the businesses and on industry in Milwaukee? Did management take a little different point of view when these were going on too?
I don't think there's any question about that. As American Motors led the way, because they brought in a whole class of, I think their class was somewhere between 19 and 27 African-American males. And as they progressed in the training program, they would move right into jobs. And of course, the word goes around. And the next thing you know, Smith had minorities in management, Alice Chalmers, all the companies were doing it. I mean, that was just the way it was. And so it had its impact. And of course, you could see the changes in the community, because these minorities would, as their companies do, would put these brothers on committees and boards in the community where they could be seen. Miller High Life was a classical one. They had Tom Shropshire, who was the vice president there, until I think he retired, and then they moved him out, and no one replaced him. Sad to say.
Yes, I remember when my father was working in the post office, and he was made a manager in the post office.
Yes.
And there was one other person there, one other person of color there.
Mm-hmm.
And he always used to joke that sometimes if one of them was gone, they'd say 50% of their minority managers were gone. But there were only two.
Well, the interesting thing there was, too, though, I'm happy to say one of the other things I did, I lobbied for the Civil Rights Bill, Equal Opportunity Employment, in 1963. And it became law in 64. And out of that, it just shows you when you're helping others, good things happen to you. I got to meet the late Adam Clayton Powell, who was one of the most dynamic and powerful congressmen this country has ever seen. I met the Vice President of the United States at that time, Hubert Humphrey, and that's a whole host of congressmen people.
Since then, since the 60s, have race relations changed in Milwaukee?
They have, and they have not. And I think that people need to be aware of the fact that resistance is going to always be there. When I see it now, the white racist is just clever. They just do it in a more clever way. When we started, for example, and you couldn't see a black face any place, well, all you had to do is say something, and they have to respond because there it is, this white universe. Where are we in it, Well, the moment they started placing minorities in jobs, both in management and in other jobs that they hadn't been in before, well, how do you deal with that? And so the system becomes much more subtle. It's the outstanding, promotable minority who now runs into these ceilings. And what do they say? Well, you can't say that we're prejudiced. Look, there's Al Jones right there, and then Al Jones, to keep his job, he's going to be smiling, everything's going to be fine. But it isn't fine. I mean, one of my classic explanations of the point that you're trying to make is, when you find a qualified minority in a management position, and you're sitting in a meeting and talking about a given problem and everybody's working on it, and you come up with the best idea, the chairman of the meeting, by the time it's over, that idea will be given to someone else. You bring it up, but then they say, well, that's very good, Joe. I'll see you after the meeting and let's get it going. And there goes your good idea. I mean, that's the kind of subtlety that you have to watch for.
as you participated in various civil rights activities, what kind of